Thank you for joining us for another streaming episode brought to you by the Friends of Chamber Music. I'm Lacie Eads. I recently had the pleasure of chatting with composer, musician, educator, and author Bruce Adolphe. His compositions have been performed by renowned artists such as Yo-Yo Ma, Itzhak Perlman, Joshua Bell, Sylvia McNair, the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, and the Beaux-Arts Trio, just to name a few. Today, we are going to talk about a piece he wrote for the Brentano String Quartet, which will be presented by the Friends of Chamber Music on Friday, January 14th, 2022. Welcome, Bruce. Thank you so much for chatting with me. We are pleased to welcome you here in Kansas City today.
Thank you. It's great to be kind of in Kansas City. I mean, obviously I'm in New York, but you're in Kansas City. That's good enough.
We'll make it work, right? Well, we are looking forward to presenting the Brentano String Quartet in January. In celebration of their 30th anniversary, the quartet has programmed several significant works from the repertoire. Can you tell us a little bit about your history with the quartet?
Well, my history with the quartet goes back, I guess, way before the quartet, if you want to really know the story, which is that Mark Steinberg, the first violinist and kind of a driving intellect in the quartet, was my student when he was a child at the Juilliard Pre-College. He was maybe, I think, 12 to 14, 12, 13, 14. I had him for 3 or 4 years, somewhere in there. And he was in a very advanced theory class for that age. And I got to know him rather well as a kid. But also, during that time, I introduced Gesualdo to the class. And we looked at a lot of Gesualdo because this group of little kids, if you, let's say 13, 14 years old, were able to do very advanced analysis, and it was a special group. And that class had Alan Gilbert and Gil Shaham and people like that, and Mark. So years later, when the Brentano Quartet started to form, Mark first called it the Gesualdo Quartet. Because he was so influenced by that kind of maverick mentality and the dissonances. And of course, there wasn't any Gesualdo to play. But I then, at some point later on, once they were called the Brentano Quartet, well, first I presented their very first concert, which was in a series I run. I still run it, except that because of COVID, we haven't done it for a while. It's a little series in Garden City, Long Island. And the first time the group played together was there. And shortly after that, Mark asked me to compose some Gesualdo arrangements. And then I also wrote some music based on Gesualdo. That was new music. So that's part of it. And then the group commissioned me quite a few times. And I wrote not only this Bach piece for them, but a piece based on some Schubert and a piece based on Beethoven, Opus 95, called Coiled. So Mark likes to have projects where composers reflect and react to great music of the past, often with a particular reason that is very compelling. Mark also premiered several of my works for violin and piano with my wife, Maria Stroke, and I met her through Mark, actually, because she was his pianist for a while. So the relationship to the quartet is long, deep, and meaningful.
Oh, well, how wonderful. And what a unique experience to get to write music for this ensemble when you have this relationship that goes back so far in many ways.
It's
So
very unusual.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just said it's very unusual situation.
Great. It is. Yes, yes. Talking about those commissions, Contradictions was commissioned as part of the Bach Perspectives Project, which premiered in 2002. Can you tell us a little bit about what this project entailed and how did Contradictions operate within this project?
Yes, well, the idea that the Brentano presented was to ask 10 composers, since it was their 10th anniversary, to reflect on a contrapunctus from the art of the fugue, and then they would also interweave the art of the fugue into the concert. And the original idea was that it was the entire concert. In fact, I think it may have ended up being 2 concerts. And then they realized that it was probably more fun for the audience, let's put it that way, to just take highlights, take certain composers' pieces and certain contrapunctus examples and divide them up into different concerts with lots of other music. Originally, I know that aside from my piece, there was something of Charles Warren, Sofia Gubaidulina. I wrote a note here of some of the other composers, Jo Wen-sung, Wynton Marsalis, Shulamit Ron, Steve Mackey. It was quite a fun group of people, and everybody's take was incredibly different. So it's a great project.
Oh, fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about your composition in relationship to Bach's Contrapunctus number 2. Your piece is a reaction to this Contrapunctus. And can you elaborate a little bit? Tell us about this idea of reaction. I know as I'm listening to both of the pieces back to back, I really enjoy picking out what I perceive as your nods to Bach. So can you tell us a little bit more about your reaction through this piece?
Yes, well, first, I did actually use some of the Bach. I mean, the theme is there. Some of the rhythms are there, especially the dotted rhythm that goes throughout. The theme is... And it's quite a famous theme. And, you know, Bach did the most incredible, extraordinary investigation into that simple little tune, which is basically a tonic dominant thing. And he wrote the greatest contrapuntal works, perhaps of all time. So to react to it, basically what I wanted to do was take the theme and some of the rhythms and some of the chord progressions and get to know them so that, not intellectually, because that I have done many times before, but try to feel what it's like to be inside it and then emotionally react to it. So there's the intellectual aspect, which is actually much simpler from a compositional point of view, which is to take the theme and do something with it. I mean, one can harmonize it in different ways or add counterpoint to it, but it's still, to make it one's own composition, you need to also connect to it in another way. With Bach, that would be spiritual. You know, I mean, because for him, the intellect and the spirit were the same thing. Theology and compositional technique were the same thing. So for me, I needed to feel that the dotted rhythms could become angry or could become scared or could become in some emotional way clear that was different than a dotted rhythm that somehow had an abstract quality. The theme also, I wanted to interweave it around itself in a way that didn't sound Baroque or Bachian, but that still conjured that up. And so I thought of it being caught in a web sometimes, being stuck, then bursting out of it, and I occasionally inserted ways of breaking away from it, which would never work in Bach, of course, but like emotional, as if I'm saying, enough, I can't take this anymore, or I'm stuck in this fugue, I have to get out. So finding ways to say personal things through the music is how I would say the reaction works.
Yeah. Well, it is fascinating to listen to. And every time you listen, every time I listen, I am picking up a new facet of the piece. And it's a real treat. And so I wonder, are there particular things that you really hope listeners grasp onto? I really enjoy watching your lectures and discussions on YouTube, and you do such a fantastic job of pointing out things and guiding the listeners to things to listen to. So some of these listener awareness tips, are there things that you want our audiences to really tune their ears toward?
Well, I'm not sure in the broadcast whether they're going to hear the Contrapunctus number 2 of Bach first. If they are or not, I would suggest to prepare for this that they listen to a recording of that. They could probably find the Brentano playing it, but any performance, even on a keyboard or a harpsichord, piano, organ, any performance of Contrapunctus number 2 would set them up in terms of the rhythm, the theme, some of the ideas that happen. But then I think the piece is short enough that the best way to approach it is to listen to it the way you watch a movie. In other words, people sometimes listen to music focusing on the performers and watching them move and looking for dramatic moments or trying to find a virtuosic gesture. And they're kind of going in and out of the music and the performance. But in a movie, you stay with the narrative. Mm-hmm. And I think the best way to listen to this is to stay in the moment and watch it, or really hear it unfold, so that you're not predicting or wondering what's going to come next, but you're just there when it happens. Yeah. Because the best way to listen really is to hang on to the story. And the piece is short enough that there's no reason for your attention to wander. And you will, any listener, I think, can tell that there is a contradiction between the Bach time, the Baroque sensibility, and the modern sensibility, and they work off each other. Mm-hmm. But there's also a contradiction in a stronger sense, which, contrapunctus means a note against note. Like contra is against, punctus is like a dot that's a note on the page. So contradictions is also about diction in the sense of poetic diction. So like someone who speaks Shakespeare speaks differently than someone who's speaking Jane Austen or Dickens or whatever. And so that's diction too. You can hear the way someone speaks, a lot about them, especially if they come from a different period or place. So in this case, this is two different periods of diction. So the contradictions also mean not just contradictions of compositional approach, but of a whole world of expression.
Yes, absolutely. And our audiences will see this on the program, but I will point out that the D is capitalized in the middle, correct? Contradiction, correct. One word, but then that what you just said is realized in the title as well with that capital D in the middle.
Exactly.
That contrast.
That's right. It's one of those, I wrote another piece for the Brentano where the title is kind of a disaster because I wanted to put everything that's happening in the piece into the title, and I did, but nobody even knows how to pronounce it. Because that piece is based on a Schubert fragment, the way this is based on the Bach Contrapunctus. So I put fragmentation as the basic title, but I put NZ in parentheses after the A, so it's Franz, like Franz Schubert. And then I separated mentation as thought. So the G is left alone, so you have Franzigmentation. So I think contradiction is a little easier.
A little bit, yes, I think so. I love it. Well, there are so many moments in the piece that pique my attention, and I have to ask, are you leaving the piece open for more conversation, more reactions maybe? What is the piece communicating in the final measures?
Great question. Well, speaking of diction, one of the huge differences of diction between the time of Bach and also all the way through the late 19th century and ever since is the idea of a cadence. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were cadence formulas that everybody knows that are punctuation marks, and you don't find it derivative or in any way negative when a composer from the 19th or 18th or 17th century has a cadence that is an incomplete cadence or a complete cadence. There are many different kinds, but they're formulas. Mm-hmm. And you know when something is over because the cadence tells you that, you recognize it, and you understand it. In modern diction, we don't have cadences unless we refer to old cadences, and everyone then thinks it's some kind of historical reference. Mm-hmm. Or we can use a cadence that repeats and fades away, which sounds like a reference to popular music. Or there are all kinds of cadences, but there's also the idea of each piece having its own way of ending, which is a rather, I have to say, an amazing burden on composers that people don't appreciate or even talk about. And a lot of composers don't even think about it anymore. But it used to be that you knew how to end something and you would work toward it. Right. Just like it's at the end of a movie when it says the end or the credits roll, you say, oh, that's it? Sometimes it feels right, and sometimes you think, oh, I guess we're not going to know any more than that.
Sure.
So you can't in a piece of music have the credits roll by in a live performance, and that's really not the point. So there is a sense, as you mentioned, there is a sense that it's perhaps not over, that the conversation is open, and that's partly because I felt that this piece was over, but the relationship between the two dictions is never over. Mm-hmm. And that there's a sense that you should carry with you this dialogue between Bach and every other composer who ever lived. In fact, most composers confront Bach at some point, at least in the Western tradition, and even outside, actually, because there's almost no one in the history of music who was such a complete musician, whose works speak completely for themselves and are so perfect, really, and tied together with such perfection as Bach. So the sense that the conversation is over, I said what I have to say about Bach seems impossible. The only way to end it would be to quote Bach and quote an ending. So instead, I let it sort of float. And if you think of that also like one of those movies where the main character is not in a resolved situation, it's not so bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to listen next when I listen this afternoon again. I'm going to listen with that insight in mind now, and I appreciate that very much. So thank you for elaborating on that.
Sure, my pleasure.
So I do wonder, as you were writing this, and it was commissioned by the Brentano Quartet, did their musical style factor into your compositional choices? Were there certain elements of their performance that influenced what you wrote?
Yes, I think for me, and I know it's true for a lot of composers, knowing who you're writing for does affect how you feel about what you're doing. Uh, it depends. I know some composers wouldn't agree, but I think it always has some influence. And in this case, there are two elements. One is Mark, and the other is the quartet itself. And the reason I say Mark is partly because, as you know now, I've known him since he was a kid. But Mark also is a very unusual violinist who has a rare way of playing. He's really on his own. And there's an intensity to what he does that I can't write for him and not think about that. So in this piece, there are gestures, especially some explosive moments in the first violin that are there because it's Mark. I felt like if he doesn't get to do that, we don't hear who he is. Mm-hmm. And I just think he's such an extraordinary musician that I needed to put some Mark moments into the piece. And I enjoy doing that very much. I've written other things for him, also for him and my wife to play together. And I know that there are things that I do when I write for Mark that don't even occur to me otherwise. It's sort of like writing for an actor whose voice or movement or something is so particular that you just can't ignore that and do your best. The other thing is that this quartet has a rhythmic energy, a precision, a vitality in the rhythm that is just so compelling. It's overwhelmingly, obviously compelling, and everyone feels it. So I felt that the dotted rhythm in the Bach could somehow become a Brentano kind of machine, kind of an engine driving the piece. And I let that happen also. And there is one other thing, which is their intonation is extraordinary. It's so great. Many quartets have excellent intonation, but the Brentano intonation is so refined that when they play without vibrato, they just play a chord, you hear the perfection of that intonation, you can hardly believe it. That makes it easier to go in and out of Baroque and modern harmony and hear how that fits. So there's a surface chromaticism in the modern, in my more personal harmony, as opposed to the more familiar Baroque sense of harmony, even with Bach, whose harmony just permeates the entire history of harmony. But their intonation does make certain ideas possible, the way some things can collide, integrate, and separate. So those are the three things: the intonation, the rhythmic energy, and Mark's explosive playing.
Yes. And I think our listeners will definitely pick up on those elements when they listen. They just sparkle. It's like when those moments happen, it's a treat. It is just a treat to listen to. So
thank you. Yeah, they're amazing.
Yes. Well, we're very excited to host them and hear your piece live in January here in Kansas City. Are there any other recent projects you've worked on or upcoming projects that you would like to share with our audiences and let them know they're coming?
There are a few things happening. One that just happened and is about to happen again is that I wrote a piece for the Dallas Symphony to go with a performance of Beethoven's Ninth that they're doing in May. Okay. And we premiered it in Vail at Bravo, Colorado, without Beethoven's Ninth, partly because you just don't throw Beethoven's Ninth on a concert anywhere. It's too huge. And also it was impossible with COVID to even consider it. But hopefully in May, it will happen. So this piece is called Diesen Kuss der ganzen Welt, which is a famous line from the Ninth Symphony of Schiller, this kiss to the whole world. And it has to do with reaching out to embrace a global community at a time when it really matters. And it actually always really matters. So that is in the Beethoven, of course. And I use that little gestures from the Beethoven, like the tremolo at the beginning and the idea of timpani solos, just a few things like that in my piece, which is only 10 minutes. And then the next thing that happens is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So that was quite a project.
I'm sure.
This very week that we're talking, in fact, today, which is in reality, this is August 5th. Mm-hmm. I know it won't seem like that in January, but
right.
This is the day that the third edition of my book, The Mind's Ear, is officially being published by Oxford University Press. Something I wrote during the pandemic, which they contacted me and said, you know, you probably have more time than usual. Do you want to expand your book into a third edition? So it's a third, again, as big as it was before. It's a book of games and exercises for musicians and listeners, composers, performers, listeners, to stimulate the musical imagination in unusual ways, sort of bringing theater and drama games into the music conversation. Oh, so that's coming out today.
Okay, we'll keep our eyes open for that. That sounds like something we definitely want to get our hands on. So great. Thank you for sharing those projects. And thank you again for taking time out of your day to share your thoughts and your insight about this piece and your history with the quartet and your work as a composer. So we appreciate you very much, and we wish you and yours the best in health and happiness.
Thank you so much. I wish that for you too, and for your whole audience.
Thank you so much. All right, until we speak again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.